Good afternoon, and welcome to the Disruptive Leadership Series. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Shana Young, and I am the Executive Director of the Leadership Institute and Assistant Vice President for Leadership Development at Columbus State University. We're glad to have you with us if this is your first time or this is one of multiple times you've been with us on our webinar series while we're all working from home. So today, we are going to be talking about the dynamics of a winning virtual team. Our facilitator for today is going to be Mr. Brian Fitzpatrick. While we are going through the webinar, if you have questions and things pop up that you'd like to ask, please go ahead and submit those to us through the live event Q&A. We will be reading those as they come in, and then throughout the presentation, Brian will throw it back over to me and I will pose those questions to him as we navigate the presentation. So just submit them as they come to you, and you won't be able to see them on your end, but we'll have them in the queue and ready to ask as we come to points during the presentation where we can stop and ask. I think that's all the housekeeping I need to give you as we get started today. And thank you for being here, and I'm going to throw it over to our facilitator, Brian.
Thank you, Shana. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here and get our webinar started today. So we're going to be talking about the dynamics of a winning virtual team. So as Shana mentioned, we've kind of built in a few stopping points along the journey to kind of field some questions and things like that. So don't be shy, don't hesitate. If you have questions that come to mind, go ahead and drop those in the chat. This presentation is gonna be something that I think that you can apply now and once we kind of transition, back into a more traditional type work setup. But I think it is something that you're going to realize it is really not as complicated when it comes to building a team that wins. One of the things that I want to kind of start off with and just lay some foundation is that when we think about winning and we think about what teams do to be good at what they do, or let me phrase it like this, to be at the top of their game. When we think about that, those things really don't change. What actually changes is the manner in which they go about them. So because of a change in location, in this instance, going from a building to home offices, the dynamics of how you do your work is actually what changes, but the characteristics that makes your team win and makes your team good, those things actually stay pretty stable. So I'm going to share quite a bit of information over the next few minutes. We're going to cover what dynamics really mean. So we're going to kind of get a good working definition and define dynamics. Then we're going to talk about what winning looks like. And so I'm going to use a visual illustration and to get you guys kind of thinking a little bit by showing you an image or several images of some companies and some individuals that I think that we would all agree upon, that we would say, hey, yeah, they're definitely at or were at the top of their game. We're going to share a few lessons about winnings. I think that's going to be really interesting. That's really the part that I'm excited about, because I think it goes into what we originally were talking about, and how we do what we do may change, but what we do is still going to remain stable. And then we're going to talk about those 5 dynamics. So I'm going to share with you 5 critical things that I think all winning teams will do, especially important for us now that we're working virtually. And then we're going to, of course, take questions as we go, and then again at the end. So let's jump into this and let's get our foundation for dynamics. So when we think about dynamics, I want you to think about the forces, properties, and characteristics that help to stimulate a few things. 1, growth, then development, and then change within our system, our process, or the team that we're on. So this is where we get that term group dynamics. So those are all the things, all those factors that really feed into how we do what we do and how well we do it. But going back to what I said originally, where and how you work may change, but the dynamics should not. So the same things that you have to do if you guys are all in an office together, if you are all in the same buildings, the same things that you have to do to make yourself good and to get to a level of winning where you're accomplishing goals and you're adding value to your space, to your environment, those are going to be the same things that you're going to need to do working virtually. The only difference is that your location is changing. And I think that now that we've been at this for a few weeks now, we've had an opportunity to really wrap our mind around working from home. Because it's something, let's be honest, is really new to a lot of people. It's something that, some jobs didn't even allow until now. And so this is a very uncharted area. It's a new space. But I think that if we can get our minds around the fact that changing location affects how we do what we do, but it doesn't really change what we do because our goals are still the same. Our outcomes are still the same. And so because of that, the dynamics of our teams can remain stable. So here's my illustration here. So we see Amazon, we see Chick-fil-A, we see Michael Jordan, we see a logo for the New England Patriots, which I know the New England Patriots are almost a cuss word down here in the South, being in Atlanta Falcons territory. But the New England Patriots, because I think we can all agree that as much as some of us may dislike them, they are at the top of the heap. They are at the top of their game. And then we have the Women's World Cup Championship team. And so when we look at all of these individuals and companies, I think we can all agree that they are the best of the best. And I even threw in Apple, just for good measure, because I think we can all agree when it comes to being at the top of their game, that these individuals and these companies would symbolize that. But here's the thing that I realized, and I want to use Michael Jordan off of this image to illustrate this. So with all of the NBA, all of the NBA All-Star appearances, all of the NBA championships and the MVP, he was the Rookie of the Year, he did all of those things. And as I was reading about him, I heard him say, we accomplished all of those things and people attribute a lot of our success to me, but they tend to forget that the year after I got there, we still had a losing record. And that really stuck out to me because what he began to lay out was that we had to develop a system and we had to develop a process that not only got us to the level where we wanted to be, but it was able to sustain it. Because sometimes what we will do is we will build scaffolding for things for a certain season and for a certain space. But then once we get there, it's like, what's next? And so we're constantly having to go back and reinvent the system. And so with the Chicago Bulls, with the New England Patriots, with the Women's World Cup team, with Apple, with Chick-fil-A, with Amazon, every one of them over the span of time, they had to build a system to not only support where they were today, but it had to be able to support them as they continue to get better and better and better and increase in size and do all of those things. And so when we think about what does winning look like, winning looks like a process. Winning looks like time on task. All things that you can do virtually. You don't have it. Winning does not confine you to a building or to an office. Each one of these, and I can use the Women's World Cup team to illustrate this. Every one of those ladies is from a different part of the country. None of them live in the same place, but yet they were all able to come together at the right time, they were able to gel and mesh and then go out there and accomplish the task that they were being sent out to do. That's how winning is done. You could see the same thing in Amazon with Jeff Bezos starting an online book company in his garage. He probably had no idea that all these years later that Amazon would be what it is. And then, of course, we all love Apple and Chick-fil-A, because Apple is the cool of computers and everybody loves Chick-fil-A. But Chick-fil-A has a process. No matter what Chick-fil-A you go to and what city in America, when you go to that drive-through or when you go inside the restaurant, that experience is eerily similar. It's almost like they're replicating the same people and then they're just distributing them all over the United States. But it's because they refine their process. And so as you continue to refine your process as a virtual team, we're going to share some things that you can really hone in on, but also use as an evaluation for yourself. And you'll be able to ask yourself, okay, so where are we when we come to these 5 things? Okay. All right. So Shana, I'm going to pause right there and I'm going to throw it back to you. Let's see if we have any questions so far before we move on.
Hey, thanks, Brian. And thanks you guys for sending in your questions. We do have a few. We have one from Dreesy that says, how do you support your team members if they're in another time zone?
Okay, so that's a very interesting question. I had a role at a major company, and the role that I had, every single person that I supported was in a different time zone. And so one of the things that I realized was that communication up front about what our cadence was going to be was really important. Because if I'm on Eastern time and the people that I support are all on the West Coast, then, to me, 8 o'clock in the morning, hey, that's a good time to start working. 8 o'clock in the morning is people are not even up in California yet. And so what we had to do is we really had to have, some good dialogue and some conversation up front, to really kind of manage those expectations. And then once we found the sweet spot, and what I mean is, where do the time zones cross? So my Eastern and their West Coast time, where did those times cross to give us a window of time where this is where we're going to, as much as we can, do our work? So is that between 2 and 5, which fits a morning time frame, but it fits a mid-late afternoon time frame for me? And that's really what it ended up being. It was like that 2 to 5 window is when we did calls, we scheduled webinars, we trained, and we did all of those things. So that's one example that I can give you about managing through a situation where you have people in different time zones.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are just now getting, even when we're not in different time zones, where some of us are working in different time frames, just because during the day we've got kids at home, and it's hard to maybe do things until if they're smaller toddlers, go take a nap, or if they are school age kids and you have to assist, maybe you need to help them during middle day hours, and you need to maybe shift your work hours to a little bit later than you normally would do if you'd been in the office. So kind of taking that same concept of, no matter what time zone you're in, we may all be in the same time zone right now, but working at different times of day, and making sure that you're, talking to your team about that, trying to accommodate as much as you possibly can during a crisis to make sure that, if they need to work a little bit later, you can make that happen and help them out while everybody's trying to be parents and spouses and great employees at the same time.
Absolutely.
We've got, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I agree 100%. That's a very, very good point.
We got another question here, kind of along the same lines. From Janicia, how can you effectively communicate expectations to team members virtually?
So I think working in this virtual environment, and we're talking emails and IM chats and group text messages and webinars and Skype and all these different things. And while all of that is cool, there is nothing that can replace a good old-fashioned telephone conversation. I think that one of the false senses of security that working in this virtual space can create, if you're not really intentional about managing your way through it, is leaning too much on the technology, too much on the web calls and stuff like that. And so when you get to a place where there's some expectations, there's timelines, and all of those things that need to be clearly communicated, in my mind, a good old-fashioned telephone call to be able to hear each other's voice, to be able to talk through those things, but then turn around and follow it up with that email communication, just to kind of make sure that everybody has it in writing and all of those things. And so as leaders, I think now this is a perfect time to really kind of sharpen your saw a little bit when it comes to documenting and putting things down in writing, because there's a lot of things coming all at one time, it seems like. And I've heard from numerous people, it seemed like I started working from home and my workload multiplied by 5. I don't know where all this stuff came from. And so I think we have to manage our way through it, but use a good old-fashioned phone call, especially when it's a deadline or it's time bound, and it's really critical that we're all on the same page. Let's get that communication going, and then we follow it up with the electronic stuff.
Yeah, we couldn't agree with that more. I think we've all felt that. Where did all this extra work come from? How am I home? And I feel like I'm doing 10 times more than I was doing when I was in the office. I don't know, but I think everybody is feeling that way. And we totally agree. Picking up the phone, even having a video chat so you can see each other. Those communications are so critical right now. Those of us who are introverts, and I'm one of them, thought, oh yeah, email and text will be great. We'll be able to do all this. We won't have to, talk all the time. So wrong, so very wrong. We really need to see each other. We really need to talk for clarity, for human connection, and it's important for the leader to be the one to take charge in that situation. We do have a couple more questions, but I am gonna save those for our next little break and let you move on to the next portion of your presentation.
All right, let's do it.
All right.
So let's talk about some lessons about winning. And so these 5 things are really based off the previous graphic. And so you see my little Rocky picture here. That's how winning is done. And so if you've ever watched the Rocky movie where he's sitting and he's talking to his son and he's talking about how, life, can knock you down, but it's not about how many times you get knocked down, but it's about getting, your ability to get back up, and at the end he tells him that's how winning is done. And so there's really a formula to this. And just based off Apple and Amazon and Chick-fil-A and the Michael Jordans and the New England Patriots and the Women's World Cup team, just based off of them, here's a few things that I know to be true. Number one, winning teams are built during lean times. Michael Jordan didn't just show up in Chicago and he was Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was actually built in a small gym in North Carolina after being cut from his high school basketball team once before. Okay. Jeff Bezos started this monster that we call Amazon, and who we probably have had to tell ourselves, let me delete my Amazon account and all of that kind of stuff, because that one-click thing is the devil. And if I stay on here long enough, I'm going to have all kind of stuff showing up at my house. But he started that as an online bookstore in his garage. So I want you to think about that. I remember seeing the movie about Steve Jobs and how, they set out to build a computer that sat on a desk. At the time, there was no such thing. It had not been done. And so, but it was the time that they spent in the garages. It was the time that they spent in the gyms. For that Women's World Cup team, it was the time that each one of them spent individually honing their craft. It was a time where nobody knew who they were. Nobody knew their names. They weren't even a team yet. It was those times. And so it was during the lean times when when they began to really take shape and take form. And so that's one place I really want to encourage all of you. So now is going to be the time to really sharpen that saw. You know, now that we have this elevated level of stillness and things have slowed down a little bit, this is a great place to begin to hone some skill, because that's how winning teams are built. Is each person owning their own experience and their own journey, so that when they come together and everybody begins to pool those resources, it becomes something that's unstoppable. Winning teams are built on role players. The Chicago Bulls, and I hate to keep going back to Michael Jordan, but the Chicago Bulls didn't really become a thing until they got Michael Jordan some help. As great as he is, and even the fact that he won Rookie of the Year in 1985, it was not until he got the Scottie Pippens and the Dennis Rodmans and all of those people that now all of a sudden they turn into this juggernaut that ends up winning 6 NBA championships. The New England Patriots. I always talk about this in just about every workshop that where I'm talking about process, because the New England Patriots have perfected it. Like them or not, they are kind of like the land of misfit toys almost. You can, other than Tom Brady, I often challenge people to name one person on the New England Patriots, and most people can't do it. And it's because they take all of these seemingly odd parts, these role players, they bring them together, they put them in a system, and then the next thing you know, in a year like last year, oh, well, the Patriots, they're going to be down. They're barely going to break 500. You look up and all of a sudden they won 14 games. And nobody knows how they do it year after year after year, okay? The third thing, the top performers in all of these spaces, they are the ones that set the pace. So what does top performer look like on a virtual team? So those are your veteran virtual team people. So those folks that have had experience, they had time in the saddle, they've done this work from home thing, even if they have not done it on a permanent basis, but they've had that experience over the years. Now is the time for them to really begin to step up and begin to lead the way. So in each one of these situations, those top performers set the pace, but they also knew what their place was when it came to the whole. So with Chick-fil-A, there would have came a time where, you know, Mr. Kathy and his idea, I want to make this chicken sandwich. I'm going to slap a pickle on it. I'm going to put it on a bun and I'm going to start selling it. Well, there came a time where it was too much for him to do by himself. There would have came a time where it was too much for the 5 or 6 family members that he had helping him. It was too much for them. There came a time where he had to begin to shift. And even though he was still setting the pace for the company, he had to shift the place that he took in the company. He had to shift from being down in the trenches, hands-on, and he had to shift to being the CEO and being strategic, because he began to see some things that probably his other folks couldn't see. And had he not made that shift, Chick-fil-A would not be what Chick-fil-A is. Okay. And so for all of you veteran remote workers, reach out to somebody on your team that may be struggling with this. You can help. You can help because you've got some wisdom and some experiences with this over a long period of time that can really add value to your teammates right now. Number 4, each person has to master their own lean time. And so we talked about this. We talked about how with the Women's World Cup team and how they came from all these different places. But then when they came together, look what they were able to accomplish. But they had to master their own times, you know, their own processes, their own training cycles when nobody's looking. And so it's one thing to be on a team call and we can do all of those things. But what are we doing? What are the habits that we're forming when no one's watching? So we have to each individually assess ourselves and look at how am I going about continually preparing myself to do my work every day. So that's important. And then the last thing, we got to remember this. For each one of these, the season before revealed their commitment to winning. Okay? So Michael Jordan shows up in Chicago. they had a losing season. It was horrible. 1985, guess what? They have another losing season. It was better, but it was still a losing season. And it was in that moment that they said, you know what? No more. And so that is where they established their commitment to winning. The New England Patriots, the same way. They established their commitment to winning when they drafted somebody from the University of Michigan that nobody had heard of, and they thought they must be off their rocker. Who is this guy named Tom Brady? And then the next thing you know, all of these championships later, look at what happened. So the season prior to always determines your commitment to winning. So I would challenge you to say, right now is the time for you to reassess your commitment to winning, because if that commitment is there, that pushes you much further along, and it puts you in a space to really capitalize on some of the things that I'm about to share with you. So remember that lean time this season, right now, this is the one that's going to establish your commitment to winning, because it won't always be like this. And so when we go back to something that's similar, it may not be exactly the way it was, but similar. Have we put processes and plans in place where we can continue to thrive and grow our teams? All right, so let's talk about the dynamics of a winning team. So there's 5 things I'm about to share with you. Number 1, they will be committed to a common vision. They will be committed to a common vision. Each one of those individuals and teams that I showed you on the graphic at the beginning of the presentation, I think we can all agree there was a common vision. There was a common vision. So winning teams, winning virtual teams will be committed to a common vision. Vision does not change because your location changes, okay? Whatever your team was tasked to do, that did not change, okay? So if you happen to be an accounts receivable team, well, just because y'all are working from home, your task and your goal did not change. The way that you're going to go about doing what you do, yeah, that might change. But the vision for your team did not change. So vision doesn't change with location, okay? The work product, so this is how you avoid creeping away from the scope of what your team was put together to do. Because if you will filter through, out of, and revolve everything that you do around that common vision. So what is the common vision for your team? And if it's something that maybe you're not sure of, this would be a good place to really sit down with your team and have this conversation. What are we trying to accomplish? And then every task that you have, you filter it through that vision. Does this get us closer to where we need to be, to the vision that we have, to what we're trying to accomplish? And then if it doesn't, then you have to put that to the side and say, okay, let's reassess this. And is there something else we can do, because this doesn't really get us here? I think in a space like this, scope creep can become a real problem, because again, we all showed up at home and started working from home, and now all of a sudden it seems like we have more work to do. So my question to you would be, is all the work relevant? Would it be stuff that would have shown up on your desk on a regular day, or to your team on a regular day? And so you have to have now discussions quite frequently around what the vision is for the team. What's that common vision? And so if you will do that, then the work product can stay in line with what the vision is. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, let's take one more and then we're going to take some questions. Number 2, winning virtual teams will engage in communication that increases effectiveness. So we took a couple of questions earlier about, how do you set expectations and different things like that. And so I want to share a couple of things with you. And this is really one of my hot buttons. Effective communication is not about volume. And I know, and I wanted to say over communicating, but I decided to be politically correct, because that is a word that I wish they would take out of the English language, because we always say we need to over communicate. We need to over communicate. But nobody ever defines what over communicating actually is. So I can tell you what it is not. It is not more. It is not more calls. It is not more emails. It is not more Skype. It is not more Microsoft Teams. It is just not more volume. Okay. When we're talking about over communication, really what we're trying to say is effective communication. And effective communication can break down like this. It takes the right message about the right things using the right method. Okay? The right message about the right things using the right method. So we got to have something to say. There has to be a message. All right? And we need to be very concise and succinct with what we're trying to say. No random information. Hence, about the right things. If we as leaders are just sharing information in our quest to, as we say, keep people in the loop, but we're really not considering how does this apply to the work that we're doing, something's going to happen. People are going to stop looking at the communications, okay? Because we're sharing things and we're answering questions that people are not asking. And so we need to know, one, what do people want to know? What do they need to hear? And we need to focus on that. And it's okay if you come up with a cadence that works for you, that's not 12 emails a day, 3 web calls a day, and team meetings every single day, but you have to decide what that cadence is. So you have to be communicating the right things, but then you have to use the right message. I would challenge every leader on this call, if you have never sat down and asked each one of your team members, what is the best way to communicate with them? How can I most effectively communicate with you? This would be a great time to ask that question, because we assume one size fits all. So let me explain it to you like this. So if you have a very extroverted D-type personality person, sending them more emails is probably not going to be the best way to communicate with them, because I would venture to say that that is probably the person that is really not reading the emails in the first place. So, you are going to have to be much more concise with them and kind of take the Joe Friday from Dragnet standpoint, just the facts. You got to give them the facts. This is what I need. This is what I want. This is what I need you to do. Move out. And that's it. But all of this extra information, you're going to lose them. But you can't know that unless you know the people on your team. So if you're looking for things to really talk to your team about, this would be a great conversation to have with each one individually. How do you like to be communicated with? And then you can mix it up. Of course, we have to do the emails and we have to do some of those things. But at least if you're aware of it and there's a certain thing that you really want to make sure you can convey, then you will know, well, I got 1 or 2 people, me sending them a text message, yeah, that's not going to get it. Okay? Or us, yeah, we need to get on a call for this one. I need to make sure that there's some clarity. And so right message about the right things and use the right method. All right, Shana, what questions do we have?
All right. So you made some really great points in these last couple of slides. I think you said thinking about the future and really sharing that vision. I think we're all in a place right now where thinking about the future seems a little bit scary because we don't exactly know what it looks like. But I totally agree with you. There are things we're doing now from home that maybe we didn't do before, that maybe we want to take back when we go back to the workplace and start doing them. There are some things that maybe we want to keep doing. They work well at home, they work well at work. We want to keep those up. We also need to talk about some of the things we need to stop doing.
Absolutely.
Maybe we've discovered being at home and in this different environment and this different way of working that we're doing some things maybe we just don't need to do. And so having those conversations with your team, I think are really important. And I'm glad you hit on that, talking about the common vision. And we've got a couple of questions here. One from Courtney that says, as a manager, how can I hold my virtual team members accountable?
I would say the first thing that you have to do is you're going to have to define what accountability means. What is accountability to you? And here is a common misconception that I hear about accountability. We confuse accountability and consequences. So let me give you an example. So if Shayna is my accountability partner, because we love that word. And so one of my goals this year is I want to lose 50 pounds. But now all of a sudden we are quarantined and we got shelter in places all over the place and all of this stuff. And there was a cheesecake in Publix that was just calling my name. Okay. And so I go and I buy the cheesecake and I come home and I knock out half of it. Well, then I call Shayna and I'm like, Shayna, I messed up. I ate a half a cheesecake today. Now, I said that she was my accountability partner. I need to tell you something. What I just did is I just undermined her role that I said I wanted her to play, because now she's not an accountability partner. Because what I just did was not accountability, that's confession. Mm-hmm. All I did was tell her what I already did. So accountability has to, number one, it has to be proactive. Accountability has to be proactive. In order for accountability to be proactive, then it goes back to this slide that we're looking at, communication that increases effectiveness. So the one thing that you can do, Courtney, to really start to kind of shore up the accountability on your team is to make sure that your processes of communicating with your team are in place. But then also understand that accountability happens beforehand, okay? When accountability is, when we try to apply accountability after a fact, that's called consequences. Those are two totally different things. And sometimes we get the two mixed. When holding people accountable is more about making sure we're all on the same track to get a desired result. When we hear that word consequences, probably every one of us thought, well, that's punitive, I'm in trouble. And when that is the point, then accountability, the word, gets a bad connotation. And it's not a bad thing, because we all have accountability partners, so we can identify with that. But if we don't, what I should have done with Shayna is I should have said, you know what, hey, I'm going through it right now. I'm walking around in Publix and this cheesecake is really calling my name, but I'm on the phone with her while I'm in Publix. Now she has a chance to talk me off the ledge. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. Really great example of showing the difference between accountability and consequences. I think in the business world, accountability has gotten a really dirty name, right? Like it's a bad word. It's something that's supposed to be mean and punitive, as you said, and it really isn't. Accountability is about expectation setting and making sure that you're doing it up front and not after the fact. So great example, really great way of explaining that. Thank you, Brian. Mm-hmm. We have got another question here from Laura, and I think this might kind of play back to different personality types that you mentioned before. But her question is, how can I increase my presence as a virtual team member?
How can I increase my presence as a virtual team member? Mm-hmm. Okay. So one thing that I would say is, and I'm totally about to make an assumption, because we're using the Google Meets and we're using Zoom and we're using all of those things, that some kind of tool like that is being used. So if that is the case, then being able to increase your presence is really simple, because presence does not stop at just you being able to be seen. I think that when we talk about presence, we're really talking about engagement. And so I would begin to ask myself, so when I'm on my team calls, am I asking questions? Am I commenting when my leader says, does anybody have any suggestions? How can we do this? Or whatever the case is? Or am I the person that just I'm on the call, so which says I'm there, but I'm not there? Now, it doesn't mean that you need to be a chatterbox, but I think that there's a way to be able to interject and insert yourself into the conversations that are really relevant, where you really have important feedback. I tell people all the time, the best ideas seem to always come after the meeting. And so I think even as a leader, we have to make sure that everybody on our team is a confident communicator, is that they feel free and open to be able to give their input. But also as a team member, we have to know that we have that as an option. And so when questions are being asked and we have the opportunity to interject and to be able to give feedback, making sure we're capitalizing on those opportunities.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. We talked about that a little bit in our webinar last week, where a lot of us are missing those conversations that happen right after the meeting as you're walking out, where you're following up with each other, where you're checking in, where you're setting a time to circle back on something or to meet in something that took place during the meeting, and kind of feels like virtually, well, and it doesn't kind of feel like it is, that we really don't have those opportunities to talk as we walk back to our offices. So making sure you're following up when you have those great ideas after the meeting and reaching out and calling somebody and taking that extra step is going to be really important during this time while we're not all together.
Absolutely.
I got one last question, and then I'm going to throw it back to your presentation if that's all right.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a question. This is from Anonymous. It says, I'm a naturally wordy person. How do I condense that to be more effective? I usually run things by my coworkers, but I just can't seem to do that now that we're all at home.
So I'm going to start at the end of your question. I can't seem to do that now that we're all at home. I'm going to again make some assumptions that y'all all have modes of communication, whether they be emails, phone calls, text messages, and things like that. And so to kind of piggyback on what Shana just said, being able to, so the same way after the meeting, you have the opportunity to be able to make those connections and reach out. You can actually do the same thing. It's just not in person. And I think that is the difference. So it feels different because it is not normally how we would do it. Because normally we may walk down a couple of doors, a couple of cubes, I'd sit down, we have a talk about it. So now it's going to require you to send an email and say, hey, can we set up a time? I need about 15 minutes. I want to run something past you. Or send a text and say, hey, I need about 15 minutes. Can we jump on a Zoom call and have lunch together? I want to talk through something with you. So I think that's one way you could do it. But then I think if it's just you just kind of looking at it in the moment, it's something that's got to really happen quick. I think one of the best things that you can do is really take into account who you're sending it to and what's the best way to communicate with them. Again, if it's that person that's that more D-type personality, really extroverted, you're gonna have to kind of narrow it down, lead with the facts, and then any narrative that needs to go along with it can be at the end. So really kind of flipping the communication upside down. So because all of the content that you need is there, all of the relevant points you need to make, it's already in there. You're just gonna flip it and reorganize it. So you ain't got to come up with a different method, but I think still reach out to your teammates, still have those conversations, and then just consider who it is that you're communicating to.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I right on with that one. Those of us who are more on the task side want to hear the facts first and the stories later. And those who are more on the people side want to hear your stories first and the facts after. And if you can just figure out who you're talking to, it can make your conversations that much better and everybody feel like their needs are getting met. Absolutely. All right, Brian, I'm going to throw this back to you for you to continue on with your presentation, and we'll take the last set of questions at the end.
All right. So let's move on a little further. So our next dynamic of a winning team is they will have a defined conflict management system. So my image here is from one of my favorite TV shows as a kid, Andy Griffith. I'm not trying to tell my age or anything like that, but Andy Griffith was the jam back then. And my favorite character on Andy Griffith was Barney Fife. And it was because of this one phrase that he would make. nip it in the bud. And so he always had this way of telling Andy when some kind of situation, especially if it had to do with kids or something like that, it was like, Andy, I'm telling you, you got to nip it. You got to nip it in the bud. So start early. And so here's the thing, y'all. Over time, tension will build. Okay. I think Crucial Conversation says it like this. You know, when you have strong emotions, when you got different opinions, and those type of factors all in the same place, conflict is almost inevitable. But what's not inevitable is getting a bad outcome from it. Because I think, you know, like accountability, conflict, the word gets a bad connotation, because we think all conflict has to end in a negative way. And so because, you know, that tension, that rub is going to happen at some point, it's important for us to have those conversations early and have them often. Because if you don't, then what'll happen is now, you know, more emotion has built up around what we're talking about, or in this particular case, what was not discussed. Now we start telling ourselves stories. And so when we finally have the conversation, now it does go to a negative place because we didn't take the time to really deal with it, or as Barney said, nip it in the bud. And so I would encourage you, you know, as a team, really have a conversation around, you know, how we're gonna manage conflict. So when we don't agree, what are we gonna do? What is the way that we're gonna do it? Given that we can't all huddle up in a conference room and all of those things, what are gonna be the rules of engagement when it comes to us handling conflicts, disagreements, whatever the case is? Okay. All right. They will develop chemistry that enhances personal connection. Winning virtual teams will develop chemistry that enhance personal connection. So here's the thing that we cannot forget to do. Even though we're in a virtual space, connecting with people, it matters. We still have to do, as leaders, our part to make that connection with our people. And so when we think about chemistry and team chemistry, all chemistry is taking multiple ingredients, mixing them together to get a desired result. And so I kind of created my own little formula for team chemistry here. So if you take experiences, so we all come to the table, whether we are a veteran remote worker or whether this is our first time ever in our life doing something like this, we all come with experiences that can be valuable. And we all come with experiences that transcend just what we do at work. So the thing about working in this virtual space, there's a natural tendency to just gravitate toward the work and forget about the relationships, to focus on the results, and then the relationships kind of go by the wayside. Well, I think it's backwards. I think we need to reverse that, because I think if we lean into the relationships, then the results will come. Okay. Even if we're not naturally wired as a relationship person, because maybe we are results driven. So it's going to cause you to have to get out of your comfort zone a little bit as a leader to really lean into the relationship factor. One of the things that I do when I'm coaching people, and I've done this for a long time, I always start out asking them, tell me about you. Before we ever discuss what it is we're here to talk about, tell me about you. What's going on in your life? How are the kids? How's the husband? How's the wife? You know, how's that, how's the new boat that you're building, or whatever the case is, because I want to make sure that I keep that personal connection. And so when we think about that, remember that all of your people have those types of experiences. They've all done really cool stuff. They've traveled. They've done all of this. We come, and so you multiply that by viewpoints. So we all come with different viewpoints on many, many different subjects. It does not mean we are always going to agree. I'm a firm believer, if we always all think the same way, then somebody's not necessary. I love the fact that on winning teams, there is always this diversity of opinion. I know for me, and thinking about thinking specifically about the Chicago Bulls when they were really building that team, I thought they were all crazy when they decided they wanted Dennis Rodman. And I'm thinking, you mean the guy with the multicolored hair, with all the tattoos and all of this stuff, because he, in my mind, he did not fit with what they were building. But it was because he brought different experiences and he brought a different viewpoint at how they did their work and how they played basketball. It took them to an even higher level. And so I think we have to lean into the experiences of everybody on our team, but then we have to lean into these viewpoints too, because they all have them. But then we have to add time. This takes time. It takes time, and it's going to take practice. You may not be good at it the first time, the second time, the third time, but I would encourage you to keep after it. Because as a leader, one of the greatest things that you can do is to help people fulfill their full potential. And even working virtually, there are still untapped potentials in every one of your people, every one of them. And if you're a team member, there are also times where you're going to have to spend some time and be willing to kind of open up and meet everybody in the middle, because maybe you're like me and you're the naturally shy guy, and so you don't really talk a whole lot. But I've had to kind of get out of my comfort zone and say, okay, let me jump in and share a little bit more about myself as well. And then the final thing, for winning teams, they will allow creativity to trump complacency in a time of crisis. So here's the thing to remember. Crisis drives creativity. It drives creativity. No invention, no technological breakthrough, no medical breakthrough, anything in the history of the world has ever happened without a problem. There's a problem. And so now is the time where we allow our creativity to really outshine and outplay the desire to just be complacent. Well, let's just keep it like it is, and then when everything goes back to normal, and then we'll worry about building and growing. No, I think now is the best time. So crisis is a challenge to be accepted, not a sign to retreat back into the comfort zone. So with that, I think that's it for me, Brianna. I see you on the screen, so Bree, that's all I have. I'm done with my part.
Hey, I'm back.
Hey, there you go. There you go.
The joys of technology.
The joys of technology.
Yes. Oh, bless the internet. It goes down about once a day, about the same time every day. Why? I have no idea. So one final question for you as we wrap things up today. Debris, you already asked Chelsea's question?
Oh, I haven't. I was having technical difficulties myself trying to get my voice on the screen, so we haven't gotten that far.
Well, good. So I'll ask it then. Do you see this crisis changing the way all teams and organizations operate moving forward?
I think it will push everyone out of their comfort zone. So I mentioned, yeah. So I think, when we have things like this, and when things are so uncertain, it seems like, one day, okay, well, shelter in place is going to last this long. Then 2 days later, we've added days to it and we added weeks to it. And so it can push you into a place where you just say, you know what, we're just going to hold what we have. We're just going to stop moving, and we'll deal with it, when everything goes back to normal. And so as much as I dislike the term new normal, I think it's appropriate here because this is a space that gives us the opportunity to, again, lean into our creativity, to become those creative problem solvers. And so how do we now begin to build what life looks like once, we're able to start meeting together again and going to offices and buildings and all of those things? Now is the time to lean in. Now is the time to build. Now is the time to assess. So I think it will change. It will potentially change how we do our work, but I don't think the dynamics of what it takes for teams to win is going to change. I think those are going to be stable, regardless of what space and time you're in, but it is going to challenge you to think differently. And I just remember, so Apple was one of the examples that I use, and Apple made the cut because when Steve Jobs was brought back to Apple to lead the company, and he tells them, I don't want to build computers. And they're like, what? We're a computer company. What do you mean you don't want to build computers? And he's like, I got this idea. I've been working on something in his lean times. And he had been working on the idea for the MP3. And so they did this iPod thing, and this marketing campaign around it was simply titled Think Different. So I think for all of us, that is something that we need to embrace now as opposed to later. Now's the time to start to think different.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And, you know, the creativity, you know, sometimes that really starts to flow when you're in a different physical space than maybe the same space you've always been in. So hopefully people are having those moments. We want to thank you all so much for joining us today. And thank you, Brian, for facilitating the session today on virtual winning teams. If you would like, you can type your email in the chat. If you want us to email you a link to the recording and slides for this session, please take a minute and scan the QR code or click on the survey link in the live event Q&A to take a survey for today's webinar. And please make sure to mark your calendars and join us next week for on Tuesday, April the 21st at 2 p.m. Where Kathy Alford will be discussing curiosity, the framework for each conversation. We have a poll set up to gain some insights before the session from you. So if you got a second, please make sure you can click on that QR code or go to our Facebook page and take the survey from there so we can get your thoughts and beforehand and use them throughout the session. One last thing before you leave us today, if you have topic ideas, questions, or you want additional information, you can always email us at leadershipinstitute@columbusState.edu. So leadershipinstitute@columbusState.edu. We'd love to hear from you. Please make sure you're following us on Facebook so you'll know about all of our upcoming webinars as we continue to post those and put them up under our events section. Thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you, Brian, and we will see you guys next week.
Absolutely.